Welcome to Soulful Crafts. So here's the promised video about my DIY polar panel. I'll tell you about the assembly process and about the problems that I've encountered while building this solar panel, so that you can avoid them in case you're planning on building one yourself. And the most exciting part, I'll test the characteristics of this beast, although there are a few buts and compromises. You'll see what I'm talking about. And also, hope that this video doesn't turn into a rock throwing contest. So brace yourself and enjoy the journey. So the decision to build my own solar panel was a bit spontaneous. I wasn't planning on doing so until a friend of mine gave me these solar cells as a gift and said that it was my turn to store them on a shelf now. But being a hoarder that I am, the shelf space becomes quite expensive real quick, if you know what I mean. So here we are. I've started the assembly with soldering the connection strips to each cell, and the first butt showed itself right away. Here I'll demonstrate. See, these cells are extremely thin and fragile. I have a few of the damaged cells left for research. Accidentally apply too much pressure with the soldering iron and you've got yourself two smaller solar cells instead of one. Solution to this inconvenience is putting the cell on a perfectly flat and rigid surface, preferably with poor heat dissipation properties. But that's not all in regard to soldering these wafers. The coating of the conductive traces on them is a subject of bewilderment. With this coating you have to perfectly solder the strip right on the first try, because there isn't a second one. If you'll try to resolder anything, the trace disappears or dissolves without a trace, pun intended, and you're left with an unsolderable cell that's only good to look at. I think that it has something to do with the fact that I had to apply flux onto the traces in order to solder them, because without the flux it's virtually impossible to solder something to them, despite the fact that the strip is tinned and the cell traces appear to be tinned as well. Thank God I only had enough space for a 16-cell solar panel, because soldering these fellas was a night to remember. But all in all, with a bit of practice, it wasn't that bad, although it took me several hours to put everything together. On the other hand, I gained invaluable experience working with something new to me, and that's worth everything. Oh, almost forgot. Each cell is a polycrystalline solar cell of half a volt and 3.6 watts, at least according to the seller's description that my friend kindly provided with the cells themselves. So upon soldering everything together in series, I should get an 8 volt and approximately 58 watt panel. I'll run some tests later to figure out the real characteristics of my solar sandwich. Prior to making this solar panel, I've done some research on different approaches to make a DIY project such as this one. I've seen people use a glass sheet for the front of the panel and sealing everything together with epoxy resin on the backside, which is a reasonable solution in regard to making the panel waterproof, since it most likely will be located outdoors. But I didn't like this approach because I wanted to make the final product serviceable, just in case. So I decided to enclose everything between two glass sheets and seal them using a silicone sealant. For this purpose I've made plastic spacers to lay out around the perimeter of the solar cells, in order to stop the sealant from sticking to the cells. I also made round silicone spacers which I put on each of the cells, so that the insides of my sandwich would be safely secured in place upon placing a second glass sheet on top. I was worried that some amount of moisture might get trapped inside the empty space of my panel, which in turn might cause the fogging of the panel from the inside, so I've placed an unreasonably large number of silica gel sachets inside, just to be sure that there won't be any free moisture left inside. I also implemented 6 support legs made from the same silicone sealant with embedded magnets, so that the panel would have a grip to the window ledge on my balcony. And voila! But there's one more tiny but that I forgot to mention. No matter how cautiously I handled my creation, still I've missed a chipped corner on one of the cells. As a great philosopher Jagger once said, you can't always get what you want. Anyhow, let's move on to the exciting part. Let's test the performance of this monolith. For this purpose I'll fashion a resistance box, for convenience and some showing off. I've scraped every corner around the shop and turned out that I only have a handful of 5-watt resistors of different resistances. But that's okay, I think that what I have will do for my tests. I'll try to arrange the resistors in such a way that each resulting resistance would be capable of dissipating at least 10 watts of energy. I hope that they will withstand some peak currents for a brief moment for me to take measurements. Now let's connect this beauty that I've pre-soldered behind the scenes and start the tests. Okay, the box is ready. I'll start with measuring the angle of my solar panel to the sun. Yeah, I know that the best results performance-wise are when the panel is located at 90-degree angle to the sun. But there's another but that I have to ignore. Because it's an experimental home DIY project after all and not a commercial solar power plant I've got here. So using middle school math knowledge, I've calculated that my panel is located at a 40-degree angle to the sun. But it's only true for the summer and only for a couple of hours per day when the panel is fully illuminated by the sun with no shading. The angle and the illumination is actually worse during other seasons. By the way, if you're liking the video so far, feel free to give me a thumbs up. This helps the YouTube algorithms so that more people can see this video and maybe find something useful for them. Or even better, subscribe to the channel. It's really nice to see the feedback from you. Thanks. Now to the real testing. I've combined the resistances in such a way that I'm able to get 15 measurement points with my setup. Let's analyze the results. Yeah, the graph came out slightly jagged, due to the uneven distribution of loads in my improvised testing stand. Slightly to the point where it's not really readable. But I think we can work with the collected data, so bear with me while I fudge the results of my measurements. I'll comment on what I'm changing and why, so hold on to your rocks for now. For starters, let's even out the staircase of an IV curve that I've got by adding missing measurement data which I'll linearly interpolate between the known points. I'll mark the made-up data with red color. Yes, the changes of the IV curve aren't actually linear, but the added points do not really affect the analysis process much. I'll also edit this measurement point of a short circuit current over here, cause it's clearly an error caused by a partial shading of the panel during measurement process. So by looking at our true measurements, we see that the maximum power point of this panel in this particular setup and conditions is 26 watts, which is far less than the theoretically expected value of 58 watts that I've mentioned earlier. This is most likely due to the fact that the installation conditions of my panel, to put it gently, aren't perfect, and maybe the seller might have exaggerated the specs of these cells a little. I decided not to test this panel in perfect conditions because there isn't much point in that, except maybe to upset me over the fact that I'm losing around 30 watts of potential energy because of the way I have to set up my panel. And just consider that I've built a 26 watt panel. Although there is a slight chance that I've missed the true maximum power point in this blind spot over here, and the IV curve could have looked like something similar to this shape, which would bring the maximum power slightly closer to around 30 watts, but that doesn't really change much. As you might have noticed, I've got another smaller panel installed over here. This one is a 15-volt panel that I've bought prior to building my own panel, in hopes that it would be enough for my purpose of charging my levitating motor that I've built. Feel free to check out the video about it, it's worth the watch. Anyways, the seller on a well-known Chinese platform declared that this was a 30-watt panel. I ran the same tests on this panel, and as it turned out, it actually is a 10-watt panel in this particular setup and conditions. And also there's a third mini panel that was my first introduction to the world of solar energy, and it's a 5-volt and approximately 1-watt panel. So I've got a small solar array over here that is connected to my DIY 60k mAh solar power bank that I've made. I'll cover it in my upcoming video, where we'll take a look under the hood of this magic box, so stay tuned for that one. And also prepare your rocks, cause it's gonna be a good one. In conclusion, I must say that it's probably more practical and cheaper simply buying a commercial solar panel if you have enough space to install it. It most likely will save you money and time. But unfortunately this wasn't an option for me, since I didn't have the space required to install a proper solar panel. The total cost of building this solar panel summed up at about $80 US. But I gained lots of experience while building this panel, so I'll call it an investment in education. Hope that this video was of any value to you. Thanks for watching, take care. See you next time.